Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ray Tampa podcast. Our podcast offers bold commentary on various subject matters with a laser-like focus on the truth. My name is Ray Tampa. I'm the host of the Ray Tampa podcast. We have in our studio Mr. Russell Cato, a retired educator with more than 40 plus years of experience in the Pinellas County schools, and Mr. Jamie Wilson, a healthcare provider with more than 25 years working as a physical therapist. My co-host, my dynamic co-host. We're always, always happy to have our guest, Mr. Brandt Robinson, join us in the studio. Once again, Mr. Robinson, welcome to the Ray Tampa podcast.
Thank you so much, Ray. I'm honored and humbled and truly, truly grateful for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
And we also want to welcome his wife, Carol Robinson.
Hi, I'm Carol Robinson.
And we certainly appreciate you being here. Mr. Robinson represents the best in all of us. He is active throughout the community. He's courageous, knowledgeable, articulate, and dedicated to righteousness. He seems to possess an endless supply of energy. Mr. Robinson has, for the last 7 years, led a small core group of activists called Indivisible North Pinellas. Indivisible North Pinellas. Through the years, the group has maintained its focus of fighting wrongs in our political and educational systems. Their group has steadily gained new members. They are forever present at school board meetings and other meetings in the community. Mr. Robinson is a longtime history teacher at DUNEDIN High School. He has had to fight certain forces while simply trying to do his job. Mr. Robinson, please share with our audience a little information about yourself, such as where you were born, raised, and educated.
Thank you again. And I just want to say I am so grateful for this opportunity, especially to be here with your listeners and everyone who's in the community doing the best you possibly can. Thank you so much for everything you do. I appreciate the opportunity. So I am one of those rare Florida natives. I was born in Fort Lauderdale. It's hard to believe, but I'm actually in my 28th year teaching history here in Pinellas County. I did teach for 26 years at Dunedin High School. At the end of last year, I was a little curious and I found an opening at a school that I didn't even know existed. It's called Pinellas High Innovation. It is the greatest challenge of my career. All 200 of our students, grade 6 through 12, all of them were either kicked out of or failed out of one or more schools. So I get to apply all of my knowledge and wisdom and everything I know about teaching and learning to really help the students who are most often in need. So it's an incredible opportunity. I'm right where I belong.
Excellent. And we'll get back to some of that later on. I want to ask your wife to do the same thing because I feel behind every successful man is an even more successful woman. So we want your wife to tell us where she was born, raised,
Thank
and
you for that.
educated.
Thank you for that, Ray. She really is my partner in all things.
Hi, Ray. I was born and raised and educated in Chicago, Illinois, and I can thank Chicago in the 1960s for teaching me the importance of speaking up and speaking out. And after I learned those lessons, I came to Florida to become a science and math teacher. And I recently retired from that job to devote my time to becoming a full-time activist for education and other important issues.
A full-time activist. Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome. So you're the force behind Brandt.
She is always my partner. I'd like to say.
Okay, Mr. Robinson, your organization, Indivisible North Pinellas, how did he get started, or just talk to us about activism?
Now, I want to tell your listeners a little bit about the Indivisible movement. So, after Donald Trump was elected the first time, there were two Democratic congressional staffers, and the Democratic part is actually irrelevant. And that becomes important because these two young Democratic congressional staffers, their names were Leah Greenberg and Ezra Levin, they came to a conclusion. And you don't have to agree with their assessment. I happen to. Their assessment was that Donald Trump would have never been elected president of our country if for decades, a lot of older Americans like us had actually been doing our part to get involved in what we call participatory democracy. Participatory democracy is when you come together with people in your community, fellow citizens on a regular basis, so you can engage in dialogue and discourse and come to consensus. And if that's happening on a regular basis in communities across the country, you're strengthening the ties of that community and you're guarding against the kind of extremism and the resurgence of bigotry that we're experiencing today. So essentially what they understood was that they couldn't dictate what different groups need to be talking about. They just needed people to come together and actually sit down and talk to each other as citizens. So all they did was put together a movement called Indivisible. They wrote an Indivisible guide, which has a lot of their basic principles. But again, it has nothing to do with an agenda because they called for citizens across the country to come together and sit down and engage in participatory democracy. And that will look different depending on if you're from central Iowa versus if you're from New York City or central Florida. And in the first year, 2017, 5,000 indivisible groups formed. One of them was called Indivisible Safety Harbor. Carol and I got involved not much longer after it started. And believe it or not, our little group has been meeting once a month for 7 years. For the first 5 years, we were basically meeting in each other's living rooms. There were times when we had, only 5 people at a meeting. I'm reminded of one of my heroes, Fannie Lou Hamer, who's famous for saying, "There's one thing you have to know about our movement. 3 people at a meeting is better than no people." But, we never wavered in our commitment to dialogue and discourse. We got very involved, especially when public education came into the limelight with Governor DeSantis and groups like Moms for Liberty. And we realized that, participatory democracy means you have to actually get out there and be visible, and you need to educate and strategize and organize and mobilize and network with fellow citizens. And we've done that because we have gone to every school board meeting in Pinellas County for the last 3.5 years, standing up to groups like Moms for Liberty. And long story short, we've been incredibly successful because our strategies here in Pinellas County were replicated across the country. And in the last 1.5 years, Moms for Liberty candidates lost 70% of the races they ran in, including the 3 races that we helped defeat them last year here in Pinellas County. And in the process, what's happened is our group has grown. We changed our name to Indivisible North Pinellas. And needless to say, there are a lot of concerned citizens out there, particularly after Trump's reelection. But at our last meeting in early March, we had over 130 people at our last meeting.
All impressive. All that information, very impressive, especially the point where he indicated they have been to every school board meeting in the last 3.5 years. That's dedication. That's commitment. That's wanting to get the job done. And as he stated, every one of the candidates except one, I think, or did all 3?
All 3 of the Moms for Liberty candidates were defeated. All 3 of
Moms for
them.
Liberty. That's awesome. Did the superintendent call you and say thank you?
Well, he did not, but I can tell you that having once taught with Kevin Hendrick at DUNEDIN High School for 5 years, he's a person of immense integrity, and we're really lucky to have him as our superintendent, our leader.
Well, all interesting points. Now, I'm sure you touched on this during your statement, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it here. What are the stated goals and objectives of your organization?
I think the reason I'm so grateful for this opportunity is because I hope that your listeners will understand that they too have the power to form community groups. It need only be a handful of citizens who are committed to simply coming together on a regular basis. And if the commitment involves dialogue and discourse with no stated goals or objectives other than what those people in the group come up with, that's the essence of it. The participatory democracy part is coming together and actually deciding on what's most important. And so you're valuing staying informed as citizens, but if you're coming together on a regular basis, we recommend, once a month, then what happens is the group understands that going forward, everything has already been vetted with each other. And when you come to consensus as a way of being, then there's a certain integrity with your group. And that makes it easier to attract new members over time because the fidelity and integrity is preserved within the group as you grow and as you start to take action. And so I think the most important thing is for your listeners to understand that they have the power to actually form an indivisible group. There is an indivisible.org website. But the most important thing is this isn't about a political party. This is about citizens coming together to decide essentially what's most important in their communities.
Excellent. Now, having defeated Moms for Liberty,
For now,
which was significant for now, that was very significant in Pinellas County. What are some of the other major campaigns that you all addressed this last year?
I think your listeners will agree that right now it can be a bit dizzying and surreal because it can feel like, the Trump administration is deliberately trying to keep us distracted because there's so much coming at us. And our ability to be calm and committed in the face of this storm is really important. And the reassurance that we provide our members is the exact reassurance that other fellow citizens crave so much. And so when they find out that there are other citizens that are standing up, it is such a relief. And that's one of the reasons we've had such a surge in our membership over the last few months is because when people are finding out that we're slow, we're steady, we always do everything based on consensus, that takes the anxiety out of it in the minds of many citizens who are really deeply concerned right now about the future of our democracy. So for us, one of the examples of something that we've just taken on is what's happening in Ukraine. We have to, and we've come to understand as a group, we have to be able to quickly mobilize and take on what we call emergency actions or urgent actions. So for example, just 2 weekends ago, you and I experienced the debacle in the White House that Friday when President Zelensky sat next to President Trump, and there was Vice President Vance, and there's, Marco Rubio on the couch. The embarrassment, the shame we felt in that display, that humiliation of a man who is essentially guiding his country through a war, a country that is a sovereign democracy. The next day, we got an email from one of our members who said, we've got to take action right now. We have to take action. And she called a sign waving in protest. And the next day, which was a Sunday evening at 5:00, we had over 100 people there to stand in solidarity with Ukraine. So the need to be responsive and to bring citizens together is one of the things that we've been able to do successfully as a group. And also because we're networking effectively with other groups, not just here in our county, but across the state and across the country, then that's a real source of rejuvenation for other citizens who are just waiting and hoping that there are citizens that are doing exactly what we're doing.
Speaking to that point, I saw on Facebook a very powerful demonstration. Very powerful. Lots of people, I would say 2,000, 3,000, maybe even more people. And I'm trying to figure out, well, where is this happening? So I called the person that posted that on Facebook, and she responded by saying it was in Asheville, North Carolina. For whatever reason, I was thinking it was in Clearwater, and I was hoping it was in Clearwater. But nevertheless, whether it's in Clearwater, Asheville, Tallahassee, wherever, people need to do something. People need to protest. People need to march and hold signs and what have you. But that was quite impressive. And what you were doing, you may not have the numbers, but the motivation and the reasoning is just as strong, just as powerful. So I want to ask you this question, then I'm going to give my co-host an opportunity. With the Trump administration talking about dismantling the Department of Education, do you foresee more teachers leaving the profession?
Well, first of all, I want to point out to your listeners that one of the most devastating statistics in public education over the last 2 decades is that almost half of all teachers in public education across the country do not make it to the end of their 5th year. And sit with that, listeners, that that this has been a consistent challenge long before all this other madness and this backlash and this resurgence and bigotry has come out. So that was a consistent challenge we've always faced. I want the listeners to understand the role that the federal Department of Education plays in public education, because it is not involved with curriculum standards. It's not involved with hiring standards of teachers. It's involved in ensuring that public schools provide equity in terms of the access and the funding for all students. That's why the Department of Education was created in 1979 after an 80-year period of legalized racial segregation and discrimination in our country called Jim Crow. That's the role of the Federal Department of Education. The 14% of the funding that the Federal Department of Education makes up is essential to ensure equity and access and quality of education for all students. And that's why Trump's threats are so critical. But I do want to say, Ray, and if I go a little bit long here, please cut me off. I want your listeners to understand how significant is what we've done across the country with public education. Because by successfully standing up to groups like Moms for Liberty, what it means is this model of participatory democracy, where citizens have come together for 3.5 years attending local school board meetings. We also need to attend city council meetings. We need to be able to mobilize quickly and take urgent action on whatever front may present itself. So the fact that we're a well-established group and we've got the foundation of that, that's what I hope to help listeners do, is also form their own community groups. And if these groups can stay together in contact with each other across the state and across the country, then we understand we can always be able to not only anticipate the need to react, but more importantly, anticipate actions and messaging and all the things that we struggle with.
I certainly agree. There's no such thing as going too long with you. Say what you need to say.
And briefly, I do want to say, just since Trump was elected, a movement has begun called 5051. And your listeners can just go to 5051.org. But this group is doing what we also hope is, they have been organizing rallies and protests across the country, and they're able to tap into groups like ours. So because we're in touch with their organization and vice versa, we're able to coordinate and mobilize and strategize quickly. And that's the goal.
Excellent. Jamie, Russ, you have anything?
All this goes back hand in hand with this whole project 2025. And it's slowly happening. Because if they're pulling the funds, we're talking about teacher loss, there won't be any jobs. So they're pulling the funds. A lot of that money went to feeding these kids breakfast or whatever, addressing disparities and inequities in the school system, or demographically. It's this playbook. I was reading where it said in the Navigator that 53%, including 37% of non-MAGA Republicans, oppose Project 2025, but yet it's still moving. That's what I don't get. If that many oppose it, I guess no one's speaking up.
I am humbled as an educator when I say this, and I mean no disrespect to my fellow citizens, but we have to acknowledge there are millions of fellow citizens out there who are grossly undereducated. So the fact that Project 2025 during the campaign may have seemed like some kind of isolated extreme document that was only representing the MAGA movement, which is a minority of voters, once Donald Trump was elected, that doesn't matter, because those other voters that thought, I'm going to look the other way and vote for Trump, they brought 2025, Project 2025 to the forefront now. And
Right.
now what we're seeing is we're going through it and it's being implemented page after page after page.
Yeah.
And the degree to which our fellow citizens really understand what was in it is critical, because now people are finding out as it's happening, and many of them are expressing deep regrets.
Right.
So we have to be there to anticipate that, and the
Right.
need to reach those voters as well, because part of what we do as a group, Indivisible, is also engaging fellow citizens. So when the time is right, they'll vote the right way.
We tried to we didn't try to, because you did come on our program and you talked specifically about Project 2025 and the dangers inherent in that particular program plan. And we're seeing right before our eyes the implementation of that stupidity. Russ, you have anything?
When you look at Trump, and I tell people, this man has a plan to control this country, to take the Constitution and destroy it.
Yes.
That's his plan. And you think about it, the first thing that he did before he got into this stuff was to make sure that we control all three branches of government. The most important branch of control is the Supreme Court. That's what he did.
That's that.
Because all laws has to come through interpretation through the Supreme Court. So if I have my guy knock down that interpretation, look what he gained. I tell people this, and listen to this. There are two things I think Trump wants. He wants to become a Nobel Peace Prize. He wants that. And if you think about it, don't put this out of context. Want to become the third president run for the third time. He's pushing that. That's an agenda. So you don't push that in the background. You know what is that? You don't push that in the background. But that's his agenda to destroy this concept. And he's doing a damn good job too. I tell people when you look at executive action is working around Congress. That's all it is. And he will throw everything at you to make sure. And he does it within the law. He does it within the law. He does everything at you.
One of the things that's devastating for me as a history teacher and as someone who understands the course of our history like I do is that our nation is so much stronger today because we have stood up to the fascists of the past, the Hitlers, the Mussolinis, the Francos. But here we are, ironically, our Constitution is as strong as it's ever been because our Constitution is only as strong as the citizens who help defend it every day. And the foundation of that is the rule of law. And yet here we are now with an emerging fascist who is going to be able to take advantage of how strong we've helped to make our Constitution. And he may end up becoming the strongest fascist of all, the most powerful, the most dangerous of all, simply because he has the legitimacy of our Constitution and the way it exists in the minds of many citizens. Most of our citizens believe that document is sacred, but they don't understand that what's been eroded at the foundation of it is the rule of law. From a man who tried to overturn the results of our presidential election and a man who incited an insurrection to make it happen.
Right.
So we have to sit with that every day and understand that's the reality. Then what do we need to do? We need to mobilize in our communities, and we need to make sure that we're a model because, as we always like to say, you know, the children are always watching.
Excellent points. Jay, Russ?
No.
Okay. I want to ask this question
Yeah.
or make this observation. The late night TV host, Kimmel and others, they're doing monologues, questioning, quote, where are the Democrats? Why aren't they fighting back against the Trump and Musk chaos? What do you think the opposition should be doing at this time, even though you've stated a lot of it already, such as mobilizing, communicating, organizing, strategizing? But what else can the Democrats be doing? Because the Democrats are being criticized all over the country for not doing anything or definitely not doing enough. What are your comments?
I think so much of the challenge that we faced over the last several years comes down to, and I don't want to oversimplify this, but messaging. Effective messaging.
Yes.
Ironically, in an age of information where we're overloaded and saturated with information, messaging. I think many of us who are socialized to believe in kindness and decency and fierce credibility, you know, when somebody made an accusation that critical race theory was being taught in our public schools, you know, we would want to stand up and refute that and use facts. But we have to also be poised to not have to feel like we have to respond to every one of the lies that's deliberately being used. We also need to develop very affirmative, positive, proactive messaging that does the same thing, but actually is very affirmative in action. In other words, citizens need to hear that we're standing up for things like affordable housing, that we're standing up for things like childcare, healthcare, the things that we know matter to all humans simply because we're human. We need to be able to develop effective messaging. And the only way we can do that is to make sure that we have strong community bonds that are at the foundation, which is what we're trying to do as our Indivisible group, is making sure we have the connections. And the reason the people are turning out is because they know that we're considered a legitimate organization that's walking the talk. and will always take into consideration their concerns because everything's committed to dialogue, discourse, and consensus. And as a result, the messaging that comes out of our organization is going to be much stronger and much more a message of integrity, because when people see what we're doing, it's really in line with what we say we believe. And so we're controlling the messaging.
Yeah.
Al
Yeah.
Green. Yeah.
I know it.
Welcome to
that-
the alone. Yeah.
You're right.
That's the
That
question.
is, you're right.
That's the question.
Messaging. And
But go
even,
on,
even,
Jimmy.
even Biden, even during Biden's term, he did a lot, but the messaging was poor. People really, he's only a few years, maybe 3, 4 years older than Trump. But yeah, he's called the old man, this, that, whatever. But he did a lot in his time. And it was very, very poor messaging. It's like he didn't, man, pat yourself on the shoulder, talk about what you've done. Because we're the lay people, we don't know.
But here's what it is, even with Green, if you notice, you had a lot of Democrats, about 10 Democrats to go along with that.
Right.
Did you notice that?
Right.
So where's the messaging? But let me go back to Ray's question. What should the Democrats do? I go back to what James Carville said out of Louisiana. Sit back. Let this thing roll with Trump. Because it's going down the tube. You can't save this country on a tariff. There's no kind of way you can save this country on a tariff. The idea that you have to do to save this country, you got to cut into Medicare. That's what they want.
That's what they want.
That's what they want. They got to pay people. You see, how are you going to get the money? Cut them programs. I heard you said this, and I hate that. The minority of white people, the poor, but they're educated by the majority of white people got the mind and the money. You see what they do? They jump down there and tell them this. Because you are not black, you should be forced. Because you're white. Your white skin gives you that privilege. You see what I'm talking about? They push it at these white folks. You know, look at your skin. Look at your skin. Yeah, look at your skin.
Yeah, manipulation.
And just because you're white, you should be grateful that you're white.
I want to just say that, we could have many podcast segments of conversations about whiteness and our long history of racial injustice. But I do want to say that, and I think a lot of your listeners will be nodding when I say this. We are living through a coordinated, well-orchestrated backlash.
Yes,
2020 will go
yes.
down as one of those years, 1865, 1919, 1968. There are some years. And if we remember, there were hundreds of thousands of Americans, and many of them white Americans, who took to the streets in 2020 because what would have otherwise been another unfortunate death of a black man at the hands of the police, George Floyd, or Breonna Taylor, or Ahmaud Arbery, became something more, because we were undergoing a pandemic, and the pandemic was making a lot of Americans start to question and doubt our institutions. And those same Americans, when they saw a man dying on TV for 9 minutes, they questioned systemic racism for the first time. They questioned our long history of racial injustice for the first time. And my point is that what came out of that was a real fear on the part of a lot of right wingers, because when they saw a lot of Americans, especially white Americans, wanting to question systemic racism, that's when they came up with an orchestrated, coordinated backlash. That's when you got these boogeymen like critical race theory attacking, quote, DEI. We've been fighting that fight ever since. And I want your listeners to take heart. We fought that fight. We've been very successful in defending public education, and we need to replicate the model that we're already doing on other fronts.
Right.
Brandt, I can't say
Good.
enough about how much we appreciate you
Love
being here, you and your wife. Awesome, and I knew it would be awesome.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.
But we're near the end, and I want to definitely get this message out to the listeners.
Can I just let
Florida-
everybody know, Ray, real quick, that,
Yeah.
our Indivisible group, we have a Facebook page. We're Indivisible North Pinellas. We have a website, indivisiblenorthpinellas.org. But our meeting each month is the first Tuesday of every month. We meet at Faith United Church of Christ in Dunedin, Faith United Church of Christ. We meet at 6 p.m. first Tuesday of every month. And I understand if it's a bit of a drive, but even if you just want to experience what our meetings are like, we're always, always helpful to help listeners and people in the communities start their own Indivisible groups.
First Tuesday,
First Tuesday of every month.
try and make a
First
meeting
Tuesday.
or two or several meetings, what have you. I'm going to
Please
try.
do.
But I want to get this information out. Florida voters must request vote by mail ballots. Must request those ballots. every 2 years, you have to do this. And if you don't do it, you definitely won't get the ballot in the mail. So call the supervisor of elections office, go to the supervisor of elections office, do what you need to do, but register for those ballots. Having said that, I want to thank our guests, the Robinson couple,
Thank you.
Mr. and Mrs. Brandt Robinson,
Rock
for
climber.
being here, the rock climbers,
Thank you.
the weightlifters, the joggers, I think, but nevertheless, active couple for being here. Great job. I want to thank my co-hosts for doing a great job as always. Certainly appreciate it. We want to thank you, the listeners, for tuning in to the Ray Tampa podcast each and every Tuesday, 5:30 p.m., 99.1 FM, The Bird. And we ask that you also go to YouTube, type in the Ray Tampa podcast, and you can see them all. And with that being said, good evening. Good evening.